Welcome to the Portland Workforce Alliance Career Talk on how to thrive in any job market. I'm Kari Smith-Haight. I am a program manager with PWA. And I know this is a hot topic right now. It's not an easy time to find a job, which can frequently be an intimidating process in the best of times. But here today with us are two experts, human resource professionals, to help kind of talk you through this and answer any of your questions. So human resource professionals frequently are called HR professionals, and they are the folks that do the recruiting and hiring for companies. So I'd like to introduce Sara Stowe. She is a hiring and recruiting expert and a member of the Portland HR Management Association. She is also our chair of the Portland Workforce Alliance Volunteer Committee. And also joining us today is Lena Baton, who has worked as head of people, which is such a great title, for CoStar Group, and she is also a member of the board on the board of directors for Portland Workforce Alliance. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and if you have questions, I'll ask the students to remain muted at this point. We have a small enough group that we might just open the microphones after the presentation, but feel free to use the chat and ask any questions that you have, and hopefully we can get them answered. All right.
All right. Thanks, Kari. Hello, everybody. Glad to be with you today. It's an unusual time, and glad to be presenting with Lena. Just a little bit of background on me. As Kari said, been in HR now going on, now over 20 years, but started my career mostly in recruiting, and the first 15 years was exclusively recruiting. And when you recruit that much and interview people all day, you end up learning a lot about job seeking and what works and what doesn't. So look forward to sharing some of the advice that will work even in this kind of extraordinary time.
Thank you. And I'm Lena. So as Kari mentioned, I was most recently head of people at a company called Cozy, which is a software company here in Portland. But prior to that, I started my career in HR kind of by the talent acquisition route, which is really working on hiring for companies. And so I graduated from school in 2008, where I found myself kind of in a similar job market. And so I'm happy to share what I've learned over the last 10 or 11 years or so working in HR, and happy to answer any questions for any of you at the end.
Oh. So, you know, we actually at the Career Expo, we call this career talk, how to land a summer job. And there's a lot of elements in the presentation that apply whether, you know, it's pre-COVID or in this time. But before we dive into that, just really want to acknowledge that, you know, this experience has disrupted so much. You're all experiencing it, certainly how it's disrupted education. And there is a lot of unknown. And I just, you know, Lena and I wanted to kind of acknowledge that before we start diving into getting a job, that it is tough, that there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty. But, you know, Lena's been through this before. I too, not this before, but we've certainly been through downturns in the economy when employment has been tough. And we just want you to know that in times like this, there's an extraordinary amount of entrepreneurship that can come out of this. Creativity is required for us to figure out the new normal. So while it may not be like it looked like 4 months ago in terms of landing that summer job, we do want you to feel optimistic and persevere for you to find something that you're going to be super excited about. But, you know, we do also want today to offer some very practical tips about what to do, you know, in the more immediate. Lena, do you want to add anything to that?
No, not really. I mean, everything that Sara just said is true. It's a new normal for us all. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but hopefully some of the information that we share today will give you a head start and just an advantage, and maybe trying to find something that aligns with all of your interests and to keep you actively engaged in where you want to be and where you see yourself either getting a job or pursuing your interests next. So yeah.
Great. Next slide, please, Kari.
Okay, so the topics that we're going to cover today span how to search for a job and why networking is so important. And we'll really emphasize why networking is so important now, given the state that we're in with just COVID and everything. We'll also go over completing job applications. That would be both online, on job boards, and on paper applications as well. We'll give you some tips on preparing your resume and interview tips should you land an interview.
All right. Next slide. So there's many ways to get a job, but there are three kind of main ways that we talk about in getting a job. Lena mentioned it already, which is networking, word of mouth. Asking friends, family, everybody that let them know that you're looking for work. Even people that you think may not be in a position to hire, you don't know who they know, and whether the market is tough like it is right now, or if it's really rich as it was a few months ago. This is really the most effective way to get something that you feel excited about. And we're going to spend a little bit more time later on in the presentation talking about how to do that and kind of demystifying, even that word networking. Think about the places that you go to a lot. Maybe you don't go to them as much right now, but think about, certainly as we start to phase back in, places that might be open to hiring high school students or new grads. PWA will provide after this presentation some links to resources online that do promote a lot of the open opportunities right now. So there is a lot out there. And there's certainly online applications as well. I think in any job search, I would never say to somebody, don't do something. But I think in terms of where you're going to spend your time, if you think about it in terms of, the percentage of time each week that you want to spend on this, I would say probably 80% of your time should be that word of mouth, getting out there, learning about other people's jobs, and probably about, more than 10, 20%, online. It's just, with the amount of people applying, it can really be kind of a black hole. And not only, might you not get a position out of that, it can also feel pretty demoralizing to spend a lot of time and not hear anything back. So those are kind of the three main ways to even kind of source out, what opportunities might be out there. Lena, do you have anything to add there?
No, I mean, I can't emphasize how important the word of mouth is, especially, and we'll connect on how that links to networking. But yeah, word of mouth is really a great opportunity for you to understand what's out there and what might be popping up before it even gets posted online or open for the general public to apply. A quick little story. When I was in high school, I was a senior in high school, and I had a knee surgery due to an athletic injury. And when I graduated college, the doctor who actually operated on my knee, I reached out to him, and I connected with him, and that's how I got my first job out of college, was this connection that I had back from high school. And that was simply just a word of mouth. So that really was my first step into launching my career, just based off that.
I'll share my story too, because it's funny, we didn't share these stories before as we were preparing for this, because it's also how I got my first job out of grad school. I had a professor who gave me some advice on my way out, who said, as you go out and look for a job, don't ask people if they've got a job. Ask them if they'll give you your advice. And that's definitely, advice that I impart to you. It's much easier for people to give you their advice. And yeah, I graduated and knew I could write, and I actually opened up the Yellow Pages, because it was the Yellow Pages back then, to publishing, and I just actually cold called and asked people for their advice, and I was just so blown away with how willing people were. The first person, he gave me 30 minutes. I remember his name. His name was Alan Canton. He was a total stranger to me, but he set me on the path of talking to a couple of other people who introduced me to another person who, in the middle of me asking for her advice, said, "Hey, how would you like to come in and interview?" And it was my first job. I ended up as a technical writer, and it was really extraordinary. And I think it took about 2 weeks for me, from the beginning of kind of doing that networking to actually starting that new position. And I think, that's one thing that I want to kind of demystify is, I had heard about networking in high school. My dad talked about it. I'd heard about networking in college, and it felt like I didn't even know what it was. And it felt like something that I didn't know if I was going to be any good at. It felt very kind of salesy, right? Like I'd have to go up and talk to people I didn't know, and that was really intimidating. And a way that I prefer to think about it is you're really intentionally building your community, intentionally building your community of people who have similar interests in the type of work you want to do, right? So maybe you're really interested in technology and you want to, you like to program, so you build a community of people who also like to program. Or maybe you have a particular interest in a specific industry. Maybe you're into athletic apparel, so you start building community with people who are also into athletic apparel. And it's through that community that certainly there's employment opportunity that can come out of that. But that community is valuable in so many ways as a professional. When you think about, right now you're at the very, very early stages of this. I use my network when I'm seeking some advice on maybe a system that I'm looking at, or I'll tap my network when I'm looking for somebody. I don't really want to go post something on Craigslist or MaxList and get 200 applicants. I'd much rather fast track to somebody that I've talked to before or is referred by somebody that I trust. So when we talk about networking, it's not something that you'll just sort of do to get your job and then go away and come back to it when you're ready for your next job. It really is community. And with that, it's about giving back. When we are part of a community, we give and take. And maybe earlier in your career, maybe you don't have as much to offer. But certainly, I think my advice is, to try to say yes when you're in those communities as much as possible. And before you know it, you'll have somebody who's just graduating high school or just graduating college who's sending you an email out of the blue saying, "Hey, I see you do this. I'd really like your advice." And, that's when you say yes and you can pay it forward. So who's in your network right now? Everybody's in your network. It can be your hairstylist, your neighbor, family members are part of your network. And as Lena mentioned earlier in the previous slide, that word of mouth, just letting people know that you're looking for work. And if you can be somewhat specific about what you'd really like to do, that helps people remember you a little bit more. Just even yesterday, I was with a neighbor, and I've got 3 high school students of my own, and mentioned that we're actually helping them build some skills while we're in this odd time. And she had this great project that she needed one of them to do, and it's really going to help them build some skills. So it may not be a job per se, but again, part of our network, even though she's our neighbor. And Lena's going to talk about LinkedIn, which is a tool that kind of helps support networking. But as you start to kind of go 1 degree outside of maybe those friends and family, and you start being introduced or maybe want to talk to somebody that you don't know, That can feel intimidating. That's okay. But approaching them and asking for their advice, sometimes it's called an informational interview, can really soften that and make it a lot easier to approach them, because you really are not asking for anything other than their time. I'm an optimist, and I believe, and I believe it because it's been my experience, that if people have the time and can, they will. It's an unusual person who would have the time and wouldn't want to help somebody, particularly when all you're asking for is advice. But that conversation really then begins them learning more about you as well. They'll be asking you questions about, why you're interested in talking to them, or what is it you're interested in doing. So as you start to, ask for those conversations, think ahead of maybe what some of those questions might be, so you're prepared to answer them, because they want to help you. You also might find, as I did, halfway through the call, that it's turning into a job interview, and just being prepared for that. If you have a parent who's working from home, you could begin there, asking them maybe for them to do an informational interview so you can experience what it's like. You can ask your career counselor to put you in touch with PWA. We've got hundreds of volunteers who are waiting to support students in informational interviews, or mock interviews, so we can give you real feedback on your interviews. So reach out to us, and we will help you. Let's see, what else? If you don't know kind of where to start with, who to even contact for an informational interview, because you don't even know what it is that you want to do, some great resources out there. There's, and connect with your school counselor on this. It's the Interest Profile through the University of Oregon. I watched a little demo video of it today, but you can answer, it takes about 20-30 minutes, and you answer a series of questions about your interests, and it kicks you back a number of positions or title or roles that you might be interested in. You can organize it by how much more education would I need to have a job like that. You can organize it by how much money should I expect to make in a job like that. You can organize it by what skills and classes would be necessary. But it'll help you kind of get a path of figuring out, all right, if I had to choose 3 of all these jobs that I could potentially be interested in, which 3 would I want to start with? And then take a look at, go back to your network. Ask people in your network, do you know anybody who has this type of job? And see if you can get an introduction. And again, reach out and ask for 15 to 20 minutes of their time to give you some advice. You'd like to learn more about what it is that they do. Not only do I trust, human nature, that people will want to help, but there's also a little bit of an ego stroke of going to somebody who's got experience and asking them to impart their wisdom to you. It's also really great when I'm in a job that I love and I get somebody who comes to me who's like, hey, I kind of love what you're doing. I want to talk to that person about it and get them excited and inspired as well. Let's see, and the types of questions to ask, in that informational, besides just generally advice, is specifically what skill sets should I be working on? Whether it's a particular technical skill set that I can maybe do some online learning through LinkedIn or through Linda, or I'm sure there's probably classes available through schools as well. Or it might be types of behaviors that you need to work on. So, if you're talking to somebody who's a manager, because one day you think you might want to be a manager, what are some of those manager skills that they think are really important that you could even start working on before you've ever even been an employee yourself? And ask them who else they know. Who else do they think you should speak with, and start to really kind of build that network out. And while not every single conversation is going to result in a project or a job, you will be moving forward. You will be doing something. And I think, in times like this of uncertainty, of unemployment, whatever you can have control over, whatever you feel that you can be doing that is contributing to that end goal is going to keep you more engaged, is going to feel the opposite of sending your application in and never ever hearing back, that sort of very demoralizing experience. And so it'll keep you going and you'll learn a ton. And I mentioned earlier, it can be intimidating to reach out to somebody you've never talked to before and ask them for their time. You'll also find that the more you do it, the easier it gets. And actually it gets to a point where it actually becomes really fun. So really encourage that. And then find opportunities to stay in touch with them. So if somebody's given you, 20 minutes of their time, they gave you some introductions, if even 4 or 5 people out from that person, you land a job, or even if it wasn't connected to that person at all, if they gave you some time, they would love to hear back and hear that you have landed somewhere. And it also does help with that ongoing networking now that you do have a job, that you can go back to that person. And like I said, you can tap your network for all sorts of advice. And if they hear that something, somebody is hiring and it fits kind of, what came out of the conversation that you had with them, you could potentially find, an email in your inbox of, hey, so-and-so told me that you might be interested in this type of opportunity and I have it. So it can work both ways. Lena, do you have anything you want to add there?
No, but just as a point, and to kind of summarize everything that you've been saying, there was so much information and useful information and tips in there that, one of the, as we move into this next slide, it all makes sense here in a bit, but as you build your network and as you keep in contact with all of the people that become people that you lean on throughout your careers and people that one of the best ways to stay in touch with them is through LinkedIn. And I'm sure you've all heard of LinkedIn before, but its sole purpose is to be a professional networking site and to connect with all the peers, colleagues, and folks that you know. And it's social in nature, and that you can comment on people's new jobs and interesting business related topics. But, as you add friends and family members to your network, platforms like LinkedIn are really meant to be kept business related and professional. So just something of note there. But, as you maintain your interests and as you go through your careers, I can't recommend LinkedIn enough. And so as we talk about that, let's move to the next slide. As you build your networks and if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, I highly recommend that you take a look at my profile and Sarah's profile on LinkedIn. You can just do a quick search of our names, and these are our profiles. Feel free to add us to help build your professional network, and also for you to keep in contact with us as you move through your experiences and your ventures, or if you want to reach out for advice. So feel free to reach out and connect with us. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about what an appropriate LinkedIn profile looks like for a high school student. So let's move on to the next slide. And I'll show you. So here's a handy little guide on what a LinkedIn profile should and should not include as a high school student. I totally understand that you all are beginning your careers, you're trying to figure out what you're interested in, and you may not have a ton of information to be able to share and include on LinkedIn, but it is helpful to be as complete and thorough as possible in doing this. So LinkedIn is free. The basic version is free. You can upgrade and get cool features and insights, but for your purposes, I don't recommend that. I'd say just start with a free account, kind of poke around in there. People that you've already had in mind in your network, go ahead and type their names in, see if they pop up and add them. But as you're building your profile, make sure, as we go through this checklist, make sure that you have a professional photo. And, you know, you'll see people that work at companies and executives and all sorts of folks have like really fancy headshots and they look like they're in blazers and suits, and you really don't need all of that. And that's okay. Just make sure that you have a clear photo, that it's just you and it doesn't include like you or your friends or your family members, because it's important for folks to know that it's you and you only, and they don't have to search for which profile or person it might be linked to. You know, just normal stuff like don't wear anything wear anything offensive, make sure there's no rips or anything, but it's really, the option that you have to choose a photo is really small. So it's really going to focus on your face anyways. So, you also want to include a headline or a summary. So if you look at this guide, under Amy's name, it says she's a gadget lover and an aspiring engineer. This is really great because it gives people an idea immediately what you're into, what you're looking to do. And if somebody's looking at your profile, like an internship recruiter for a company or a university, they'll know exactly where you might be a fit. So I highly recommend doing that. And if your goal is to just, you know, if you know you're attending college or if you're taking a really cool internship or going to a trade school, please put that in there because I think that's great. Also include a summary. So tell people what excites you, what motivates you, what skills you have, what you plan on doing next, any upcoming projects that you might be working on. A summary is really a way for a person to take a look at your profile in depth maybe, but not necessarily go through some of the experiences you have. And as a high school student, you may not have relevant experience to put on your profile. As you put a profile together, it'll ask you where have you worked, what dates what dates were you employed, are you currently working there, and then you're able to provide some sort of summary within that job experience that gets to highlight things that you've accomplished or worked on or that you're proud of. I'd say if you have a resume together, this is very similar to a resume, so you can easily just transfer projects, internships, conferences, anything that you have on there over to your LinkedIn profile. And at this point in your careers, as you're just launching, I wouldn't say it's a bad idea to just simply copy and paste if you really have good copy on your resume. But you also really want to make sure that your experience lines up with your resume, because a lot of times if you are handing your resume out or you're interested in jobs or even poking around on a company website, if they will go ahead and look at your resume, but they might even look at your LinkedIn profile to see what kind of social media accounts you have, and LinkedIn is often one of the first ones that will pop up. So just be sure that you have a complete profile and that it's accurate and to at least to the best of your knowledge. If you have something else that you're really proud of, like if you don't necessarily have honors or awards to include yet on your profile, do you have a GPA that you're really proud of? Like, are there other things that you could include that you feel you've accomplished and that would make you a really good fit for the roles that you're interested in, the industry that you're interested in? And don't be overwhelmed is probably the best advice that I could give looking at LinkedIn. You might look at my profile or Sarah's profile or even Bill Gates's profile on LinkedIn, and you'll realize that people with several years experience and who've been working for a really long time have a lot to add. And it's like your walking digital business card, and knowing that you're a high school student or that just starting in your career, recruiters will understand that, but just be sure that you keep your profile as complete, accurate as possible. And again, like your resume, make sure it's grammatically correct. There's no spelling errors or use of any unprofessional language. And yeah, as you continue to gain experience and accomplish really cool stuff, be sure to update your profile accordingly. If you want to continue working on your LinkedIn profile and just check out what other tips there might be for you as a high school student and then later as a college student maybe, You can look at student.linkedin.com, and I'll pop that into the chat here in just a moment. And it has a bunch of tips, just like this guide, on how to best set up your profile and other resources as well.
And I'd add as well that you know, if there are particular companies and there's groups there as well of common interest, to start following them. You know, certainly if it's a company that you're very interested in working for, and you know, you start following them today, but you really start pursuing them as an employer, you know, in 2 or 3 years. As a recruiter, when I go to look at your LinkedIn, if I see you've been following my company for 2 or 3 years, that gets me pretty excited. You know, when we go to interview and make a selection, is essentially 3 questions that we're answering for ourselves, which is obviously, can this person do the job, right? Do they have the skills and qualifications? Are we going to like working with them? So that's where the culture comes in, the values and the behaviors aligning. And then the third question is, are they going to love the job? And so it's pretty exciting for me if I see a candidate who's been following our company, or following, you know, a similar company, or, you know, a discussion group that's relevant for a long time. I know that they are likely going to be really into, you know, working for us.
Yeah, and I know that we have maybe a couple of college students as well on the line, and so I'll post a link as well that's relevant to college students.
So we just jump to the next slide. So I want to make sure we get through all our content here. It's you know, in terms of the tips and the tricks, you know, I think that the theme is, yes, you know, get out there, talk to everybody you know. You can look online as well. But, you know, to use your time to really kind of, you know, drive things forward. So it's a lot of investment that may not seem like it's paying off right away, but it will. It will. One great way for you to be able to be ready to talk about your strengths, you know, whether it's in an informational interview or specific, is to look at something like Strengthsfinder. They have one for students. And it's good because it gives you that language. And one of the things I recommend to people is, when you get those strengths, when you do the assessment, it costs about $30. It'll give you, you know, your top 5 strengths. It'll explain what it means in terms of how you've answered all the other questions. And then think about, okay, what story would I tell to illustrate that strength? Because that's going to be a great story to tell in a job interview. If you come in and say, you know, my strength is bringing people together, they're going to think, great, brought people together. And you don't struggle, just said it's your strength. So I have those stories ready to go. And also think about, you know, everything that you bring right now. You know, I know this is an extraordinary time. In one way that really across generations, and it connects across cultures as well. So there's something that you have in common with everybody that you're going to be encountering just by living through this. Just by living through this, you are building resilience. You are building grit. You know, when you, every day, I'm going to find somebody to talk to, and I'm just going to, you know, that is going to build such good practice and such faith in yourself that you can keep going. These are really important qualities when companies look at how flexible employees can be with change, how coachable they might be when they get into the workplace. So these are kind of characteristics of top performers. And you're building that right now by going through this extraordinary time. You know, also think about, you know, in terms of kind of what experience you can add, you know, how can you help people right now? You know, experience does not have to be paid. It's totally irrelevant if it's paid, really. So, you know, are there neighbors that you can help with? Can you help, you know, maybe you've got parents who are struggling with the technology that you can help them. Are there siblings, or is there kind of some online tutoring that you can do with other students? So lots of curiosity, lots of questions. So we should go to the next slide and you can talk about the applications.
One moment, sorry, I was responding to a chat. Madeline made a really good
sorry.
Yeah, let's see here. Applications. Okay. So yeah, as we had both mentioned earlier, there are two different types of ways to fill out applications. And, you know, an application is really just saying, hey, I'm really interested in your job. I think I might be a good fit. So here is my official application saying I would like to apply for the role. You can do this online at home. You can do this, a lot of companies have it available on a mobile app. So you can do it on your phone, you can do it on a computer. You can also, you know, places like Target, they actually have kiosks right there in store. So you can go ahead and fill out an application there on site. And this is really great for a couple of reasons, because one, you do it right when you're in the store. And two, you can also follow up and say, hey, is there a manager available or an assistant manager I could speak to? I just put in an application and I'm interested in learning about next steps. Something as simple as that lets the manager know that you've applied, that you're interested. It puts a name and the face and the application all together. And they might even hand you a business card and say, hey, check back with me in a week or two. And then that's your direct into a hiring manager. And that's great because, you know, if you've, for example, we're using Target as an example here, but if you go onto their website and submit an application, a recruiter or somebody on their recruiting team will take a look at it, but they probably get thousands of applications a day. And it might take some time for them to review your qualifications and get to it. Other large companies like Target, if you don't feel comfortable using a kiosk, you can also fill out a paper application. You can just go in and do the same thing, ask a customer service desk or a manager, an employee for a paper application. They can help you with that. A lot of the smaller, more independent places like restaurants, convenience stores, small businesses, because they don't have large scale recruiting needs like some of the bigger companies, they probably default to using a paper application. So just because they do that doesn't mean that it's any different, or, you know, they don't have the resources or funds to do that. It's just completely different in nature. You may also be asked, in addition to an application, to submit a resume. An application simply can just be like what your name, your social security number, your date of birth is. Companies do have an obligation to check your age just to make sure that you meet a certain age requirement for them to hire you legally. So don't be surprised if, in addition to your application, you might be asked to submit a resume, or even vice versa. If you walk in and submit a resume, they might even also direct you back to an online application. Moving forward to the next slide. As I was saying earlier, if you go into a large chain, they're going to have something, it's called basically just, it's their version of a job board, but they have a software that they can log into and look at all of the resumes that come in, all the applicants that come in. This is called the applicant tracking system. Based on the role that they're looking for and the job description, they have keywords that they're interested in. If a position requires that you have great customer service skills, they might type that into that software system and see what profiles come up where that word has been used. That tracking system will rate you and say, okay, we will kind of parse your resume, and this software kind of automatically goes through the job of digging and sifting through your resume and letting the person, the hiring person, know what % match you are to the position. So again, I'd say it's great to have a general resume, but if you notice jobs that say like you're required to be good with people and you have customer service skills written on there, then it may not be like a complete one-to-one translation in some of these systems. So just be aware of keywords. Other things is, it will also ask you to upload attachments. So this could be, you know, a resume, a cover letter, anything in that nature. When you're uploading these attachments, be sure that you're not using a resume that has a really crazy design layout or font or colors that might max out the upload maximum, which happens often. Depending on how long your resume is, or if the file is large, the system will reject your resume and ask for a more simpler version. You might even be asked to answer essay questions. So this is pretty common too. If the job saying it's customer service. If the job says, okay, can you give me an example of when you've had to demonstrate customer service skills in a really tough situation? It's going to ask you that question right on that online application and then expect you to give a response. Sometimes those responses are limited to a certain number of characters. Sometimes it's as long as you'd like it to be, but just make sure that your spelling and your grammar are triple checked before you submit that application. A lot of folks look at that, and it's not a disqualifier by any means, but it does say something about your candidacy if you might not have taken the extra few minutes to go ahead and review what you're submitting. Yeah, so read your answers before submitting. I mean, triple check your name, your address, especially your phone number, just because that's how they might get a hold of you, or via email. And then be sure you click submit at the end. Most systems like this will send you a confirmation email. And so just be sure to look for that within the next 24 hours to make sure that when you hit submit that they actually received it. And yeah, if you show up to a kiosk or a website, again, just dress professionally and as much as you find appropriate to be sure that the presence that you show up with, in case you speak to a hiring manager, matches the level of professionalism that they expect of you.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That drop-in might turn into an interview right there and then. And as far as the keywords that you mentioned, you know, looking at the job posting is going to kind of clue you in on what those keywords are. So yeah, so translate that. If you're using one way to describe it, you know, talk about it the way the company is. Let's see. So I just want to, I just want to jump down to the STAR method, because I want to leave it a little bit of time for Q&A. But Lena, do you want to talk about kind of actually in the interview, how to prepare and answer the interview questions?
Yeah, let's see what slide are we on? Oh, here we go. Okay. So are you saying, are we going to cover the STAR method?
Yeah. So, so typically the interview questions are, tell me about a time when.
Okay. So yes, as I had mentioned in the previous slide, if an application says like, can you tell me a time when you've dealt with a really difficult customer, or you missed a deadline on a project? These types of questions are intended to ask you some really crazy scenarios or challenges that you might have occurred in projects or work or experiences or anything of that nature, because it wants to analyze how you were able to approach the situation, what you did as a task and an action, and then what the result of that is. And so this is basically what the STAR method is. It's situation, task, action, and result. So a lot of the time it's, can you tell me a time when X, Y, Z? So that's the situation, is they're asking you to think in your past, people that you've worked with, projects that you work with at school. Think of a time where you had to demonstrate your knowledge, skills, or abilities in an extraordinary way. What you want to do is describe the task that had to be done and what the resolution was. And then so for action, they might even expand and say, okay, well, can you help explain what actions did you take to complete the task? So this is basically all of the actions that you took to make sure that you got to a favorable solution or a success. And then, yeah, what was the outcome? And honestly, in these situations, what they're looking for is not necessarily a success every time. They're looking for your ability to approach a difficult situation, think about it methodically, and then come up with an action plan on how to solve it. In my personal interviews that I've had for jobs in the past, I have certainly given them examples of situations that might not have had a successful outcome. But what I do follow up in that scenario is what I learned from that situation and what I took away from that and how that's helped me approach difficult situations like that in the future.
Yeah, great advice on the takeaway there. Yeah, it's, you know, as you are kind of doing your networking and researching what you want to do, you know, also spend time researching what are typical interview questions, or you know, with the Strengthsfinder, what stories could I tell that would illustrate that, and just be prepared with those stories. The reason that we ask those stories is because context is everything. So while, you know, we all probably know the right way to deal with somebody who's being unreasonable with us, in the context of the store was about to close, or my manager was calling me at the same time, or, you know, something broke on aisle 5, whatever it might be, that context really tells us how you behave, because nothing sort of happens in a vacuum in a perfectly academic way, and it's also, you know, it's just telling for us on you know, if you've got the competency, if it's something we think we can develop in you, or if it's like, gosh, this person just really, it's gonna be too hard to train somebody and teach them the value of customer service, right? So then we move on. But yeah, that structure, that situation, task, act is kind of like your framework for your answer. So as you prepare, think through, you know, are you hitting all of those? And as Lena said, if it wasn't successful, cap it off with, this is what I took away, this is what I learned, I would do differently next time. Let's see. Are there any, because we're coming up to time, are there any questions that we have, Susan or Kari, from the chat, or anything that came in ahead of the presentation?
Hey, Madeline has asked about the keywords and tracking for applications. Is there a good resource?
Oh, I was just typing a response to
that.
I
see that.
But yeah, so as I had just typed out, so keywords are basically words that you see pop up frequently in job descriptions and what they emphasize the most. So in this example, I said a cashier might be required to have customer service skills. They might use customer service or customer service skills multiple times in that resume. And that should be a light bulb should go off for you and say, okay, they really want someone that has strong customer service skills. Another example would be like if there's a manager position, they might say that you need to be strategic, or you have to drive strategy, or you have to design strategy. You know that being strategic, a strategic type of person, leader, is going to be required of you. And so words like customer service skills, strategic, focused, driven, like those types of words can all be keywords, and that's giving you insight into what they're really looking for. So they're the hard skills generally, and then these keywords also can help give insight as to what their ideal employee type would be.
Just to kind of move us ahead as well, Ave posted a link to the Portland Workforce Alliance website, where we are trying to post jobs that we hear about, particularly relevant to people seeking first-time jobs, and it is in the chat, but we could also send that out as well. And if there, does anyone else have more questions right now? So we've kind of skipped over some of the slides. We can, Lena or Sara, is there anything else you really want to point out as we're running out of time? Thank you for sharing all your knowledge and experience. It was really informative. What would you recommend to students right now, like or just recap your #1 advice for somebody looking for a job right now?
Don't give up. Keep going. Keep going. The numbers sound bad, but there's many people that are working, that want to help you. Companies are hiring. It's out there. The worst thing you can do is stop. So just every day do something. And there's so many. PWA is a great place to start. If you don't know who can help you, there's hundreds of us waiting too. So.
We also 100% agree with that. Do not give up. In a normal economy, in a normal market, any single position can have a ton of competition as is. And so given these extraordinary circumstances that we're in, it just means that things feel a lot more frustrating and difficult for everybody across the board. So please do not give up. As someone who lived through the 2008 backslide in the economy, it was tough, but there are resources. Please add myself, please add Sara on LinkedIn as your network, and then we can continue to help you and answer any questions that you might have directly.